Some moments feel like fate grabs you by the collar, yanks you sideways, and whispers, "Pay attention. This is important." That's how it felt the day I met David. It started with the rain. That cold, drizzly kind that creeps under your coat and soaks through your socks. I was already late for an interview, my third one that week, all for jobs I wasn't even sure I wanted. Hair frizzed, heel clicking too hard on the wet pavement, resume tucked in a plastic sleeve that had seen better days. Classic Julia. The alley was a shortcut. It always had been. Shady, quiet, but it shaved a good 7 minutes off my route. Only this time, it betrayed me. I didn't see the slick patch until it was too late. One step, one yelp, and bam, I was on my back, staring up at a gray sky that looked like it was holding back a bigger storm. "You all right?" A voice rasped, deep and unexpected. I blinked up at him. Long gray coat, fingerless gloves, scruffy beard, eyes sharp as November wind. A man you might cross the street to avoid on a bad day, but something in his tone wasn't pity. It was curiosity. "Just my luck," I muttered, trying to sit up, rubbing my elbow. He offered a hand. Rough, warm, and surprisingly steady. "David," he said. "Julia," I replied, not quite sure why I gave him my name. He helped me up without another word. I was brushing dirt off my skirt when my stomach growled, loud and traitorous. Of course, I hadn't eaten. Again. "Got a meeting?" he asked, nodding at the resume still clutched in my damp hands. "An interview," I sighed. "Had, I guess. I'll never make it in time." He didn't say much, just kind of nodded like he'd seen it all before. But he reached into his coat and pulled out a beat-up thermos. "Coffee?" Now, I was raised to be cautious, but something in me softened. Maybe it was the bruised pride. Maybe the way he looked like he'd once been something more than what he seemed now. I took a sip. It was awful. Burnt and bitter. But I smiled anyway. "Thanks," I said. "That helps." He chuckled. "A little kindness goes a long way. Or at least, it used to." I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was tired of pretending I had it all together. Maybe I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of me, someone on the outside looking in. But I did it. "Come on," I said. "Let's get something warm." My treat. He raised an eyebrow, like he thought I might be joking. But I wasn't. We walked 2 blocks to a tiny diner I knew, the kind where the waitresses call you hon and the soup always tastes like someone's grandma made it. He didn't say much at first. Just spooned his chili in slow, steady bites, like it was the first decent meal he'd had in a while. I watched him, wondering who he was beneath the grime and guarded silence. He caught me staring. People don't usually invite me to lunch. I blushed. Well, people are missing out. He smiled, just a flicker, and looked out the window. "You're different." We talked. About nothing, then about everything. He said he used to work in finance, once upon a time. I told him about my degree, the mountain of student debt, the job market that seemed allergic to hiring actual humans. And somewhere between the second cup of coffee and splitting a piece of pecan pie, I offered something crazy. "If you don't have a place tonight," I said quietly, "you could crash at my apartment. Just for the night. It's not much, but it's dry." He froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Why would you do that?" I didn't have a good answer. "Because you're kind. And you helped me up when I fell." Seems fair. For a long second, he didn't answer. Just stared at me like I'd done something dangerous or maybe something rare. Then he nodded, once. "All right, Julia," he said. "One night." What I didn't know was that I had just invited a millionaire into my home, but that part comes later. You ever have that feeling when you do something kind of reckless, but your gut says, "Trust me on this one"? That was me, leading a homeless man, David, through my apartment door like I'd brought home a stray dog. Except this dog had a gaze that missed nothing and a way of moving like he didn't want to be seen at all. My place was nothing special. 1-bedroom walk-up on the East End, kitchen the size of a postage stamp, and a couch that had seen one too many Craigslist owners. But it was mine. And that night, it was also his. "I'll take the floor," he said, like it was already too much to be inside. "You'll take the couch," I shot back, tossing him a folded blanket. "Let me be the one who insists." He looked at me for a long beat, like he wasn't used to anyone standing up for him, only to him. "All right then. Couch it is." I made us tea chamomile, the only kind I had, and we sat in silence while the radiator clanked like it was chewing rocks. Every once in a while, I'd glance at him. The way he held the mug, careful and slow, like it might disappear if he blinked. "You used to have money, didn't you?" I blurted out, before I could stop myself. His eyes flicked to mine. Sharp. Calculated. "What makes you say that?" "The way you talk. And you order soup like a guy who used to make deals over lunch. Also," I hesitated, "you fold your napkin after you use it." He chuckled, low and dry. "That obvious, huh?" I shrugged. "I read people. Helps in interviews. When I get them." He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Instead, he leaned back, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. "There was a time," he said slowly, "when I thought I had it all figured out. Power, money, people who pretended to like me." He turned back toward me, voice flat. "Then one day it all vanished. Just like that." "Not just like that," he said. "It took betrayal, greed, and a knife in the back, wearing a suit and a smile." I didn't ask more. "Not yet. Some wounds aren't ready for daylight." He slept on the couch that night, barely moved an inch. In the morning, he folded the blanket, wiped down the mug he used, and asked if he should go. "You hungry?" I asked. He paused. "Always." So I made eggs and toast. We sat at the tiny table, knees knocking, pretending it wasn't weird. "Why did you help me?" he asked between bites. "Because someone should have helped me when I needed it," I said. "Because life's too hard to go it alone." He nodded, slow and thoughtful. "I owe you." I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything. Just don't disappear without saying goodbye." He didn't answer, but something passed through his face. A flicker. Regret? Fear? I went off to my rescheduled interview. Third time's the charm, right? It went okay, but all I could think about was if David was still going to be there when I came back. He was, sitting by the window, watching the street, lost in thought. "I've been thinking," he said when I dropped my bag. "About trust." "Dangerous topic," I replied. "Maybe, but I want to show you something. Tomorrow, if you're willing." "Show me what?" He hesitated, then pulled out a worn wallet. Inside was an ID, old, faded, but unmistakable. David R. Langston, CEO, Langston Innovations. I nearly dropped my keys. "That's you," I whispered. "Was." I sat down hard. "You're that David Langston? The one who went missing 2 years ago? They said you ran off. Stole money. Faked it." He didn't flinch. "That's what they wanted people to believe." "But why?" "Because I found something. Something I wasn't supposed to find." The air between us shifted, like the floor had tilted and I hadn't noticed until now. "You don't have to believe me," he said. "But if you want to know the truth, come with me tomorrow." And somehow, I already knew I would. You know those moments where your brain screams, "Don't do this," but your heart just shrugs and says, "Too late"? That was me, the next morning, standing outside a boarded-up warehouse in an industrial part of town with David at my side. The sky hung low and gray again, like it hadn't quite moved on from the storm the day we met. "This was one of the satellite offices," David said, prying open a side door like he still had keys to places that no longer belonged to him. "They stripped it clean months ago, but I stashed a few things before I left. Insurance." The inside was musty and cold. The kind of place where secrets cling to the walls like mildew. I followed him past collapsed cubicles and old projectors. And then, in a tiny back office hidden behind what used to be a break room, he pulled up a cracked floor tile and reached down into a hidden compartment. Out came a small metal box, dented and rusted on the edges. Inside, flash drives, printed documents, and a worn leather notebook with names, dates, and scribbled calculations. "This is what they didn't want anyone to see," David said, holding up a spreadsheet printout. It's how they laundered millions through shell companies overseas. And when I found out, I confronted my partner. Next thing I know, I'm being framed for the whole thing. Your partner? I asked, scanning the papers. Who? He looked at me with eyes gone cold. Miles Sterling. I nearly choked. Wait, the same Miles Sterling who's now CEO of Langston Innovations? The one who's been on every business magazine cover for the past year. David nodded grimly. He was my college roommate, my best friend, and the man who sold me out. My stomach twisted. Why didn't you go to the police? He gave me a look. With what? His lawyers could buy a city block. Mine ran the moment I stopped writing checks. I needed time, proof, and someone to trust. And now you trust me? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know if I trust anyone, he said. But you're the first person in a long time who didn't want anything from me, who didn't look away. That hit me somewhere deep, because it was true. I hadn't looked away. Not once. He packed the documents carefully back into the box. We need to skin these, make copies, and get someone who can actually help us bring this to light. Like a journalist? I offered. Or a lawyer. A real one. We rode back to my apartment in silence, both wrapped up in thoughts too loud to speak. I made a soup again, because that's all I had, and we sat on the floor with a laptop, uploading files into a shared drive. That night, I couldn't sleep. My head was spinning with questions and fears. What if someone found out I was helping him? What if I lost everything I barely had? I stepped out into the kitchen for water and found David still awake, hunched over the notebook. You okay? I whispered. He looked up, tired but calm. I will be. We will be. This mess, it's almost over. And for the first time, I saw it. Not the man in the alley. Not the one everyone thought had vanished into shame and scandal. I saw the fighter. The leader. The man who'd built something from nothing and who had lost it all not because he failed, but because he cared too much to stay silent. David, I said, sitting beside him. I'm in. Whatever this is. I'm with you. He didn't say anything, just took my hand in his quiet, steady warm. And in that small, cluttered apartment, something shifted between us. Something that had nothing to do with betrayal or money or revenge. Something like trust. It's funny how fast your life can change, how a stretch of days can spin you from obscurity into the center of a storm. Just a week before, I was another girl in a crowded city looking for a job. Now I was holding hands with a fugitive CEO and helping prepare evidence that could blow up a billion-dollar corporation. So naturally, I started waking up with chest pains. We found a lawyer. Well, more like the lawyer. Rebecca Trent. Fierce, sharp as a blade, with a voice like velvet-wrapped dynamite. David remembered her from years ago, said she'd once sued a tech giant for whistleblower retaliation and won. When we walked into her tiny office 2 days later, I expected her to laugh us out the door. But instead, she leaned back in her chair, steepled her fingers, and said, "About damn time." You knew? David asked. I suspected, Rebecca replied, flipping through our scanned documents. You vanished too cleanly. Sterling's rise was too fast. It stank of a setup. But I never had proof until now. She looked at me. And you are? Julia. I found David. Found him, she repeated, eyes twinkling with interest. That's one way to put it. I believe him, I said, suddenly feeling protective. All of this, he didn't make it up. Rebecca smirked. Honey, if he did, he's got the best imagination on the eastern seaboard. She slid a folder across the desk. If we do this, we go all in. Court, media, federal investigators. And trust me, Sterling will fight like hell. David nodded. Let him. I watched the two of them, old comrades, back in the ring, and felt something stir in my chest. Pride? Fear? Both, probably. But also something else, like I'd finally stepped into a life that mattered. Back at the apartment, things were changing. David shaved. Got a haircut. I almost didn't recognize him at first. Clean jawline, sharp cheekbones, the posture of a man stepping out of his past and into his own skin. You look different, I said, handing him a mug of tea. Do I? He asked, half smiling. I feel the same. Just less invisible. The press release hit the internet 2 days later. Missing CEO returns with explosive evidence of corporate fraud. Our phones exploded. So did the front door. Well, not literally, but the media might as well have moved in. We had reporters buzzing outside like bees on sugar, neighbors suddenly chatty, and a legal team ready to go to war. David stayed calm through most of it. But me? I was unraveling, quietly and steadily. What if they come after you? I asked him one night, pacing the kitchen. They will, he said. And I'll be ready. But what about me? I whispered, hugging my arms to my chest. He paused, walked over, and gently took my hands. Then we'll be ready. I hated how safe I felt when he said that. Because safe was dangerous. Safe meant letting myself believe this was more than a partnership. That maybe this was something like us. The deposition was scheduled for the end of the month. Rebecca worked around the clock, David's name was back on the news, and Sterling was doing his best to paint him as unstable, bitter, desperate. They'll try to break us, David said one night, sitting on the floor next to me with files spread between us. They might succeed, I said, only half joking. He turned to me. Then we'll build something stronger. It wasn't romantic. Not exactly. But it was intimate. Real. And that night, when I leaned my head on his shoulder, he didn't move. Just whispered, "Thank you." And I said, "You're welcome." But this is just the beginning. Because I knew what came next. The fight. The courtroom. And the part where love gets tested not by candlelight, but under pressure. I always thought courtroom dramas were full of exaggerated tension, sweaty brows, last-minute reveals, someone gasping in the back row. Turns out, they underplayed it. David's first public appearance in over 2 years was like dropping a match in a dry field. The courthouse steps were swarming with reporters, flashing bulbs and microphones being shoved in faces. I held his hand as we walked past them. His grip was firm. Steady. Mine was pure panic. "Julia," he whispered as we passed a cameraman. "You don't have to be here." But I did. I couldn't explain it, not even to myself. I needed to stand beside him, even if I was just the girl who once offered him chili and a couch. Rebecca met us at the entrance, clipboard in hand, heels clicking with purpose. "Sterling's team already filed a motion to suppress," she said. "But we've got the receipts." And the receipts don't lie. Inside, the courtroom smelled of cold marble and nerves. David sat, with his back straight, jaw clenched. Across from us, Miles Sterling looked like every glossy magazine cover he'd graced, tailored suit, smug expression, the whole I eat startups for breakfast vibe. He looked at David and smiled. Like nothing ever happened. David didn't return it. The first few hours were procedural. Motions, objections, a lot of legal jargon that made me feel like I was back in an undergrad lecture I hadn't studied for. But then Rebecca brought out the big guns. Emails, financial trails, a voice recording. My favorite part? The spreadsheet. It's simple, she told the judge. Mr. Langston discovered discrepancies that implicated Mr. Sterling and 2 other board members. Instead of investigating, they framed him. And there it was, the collective gasp I thought was only for TV. Sterling's lawyer, a guy who looked like he'd been carved from granite and sprinkled with Wall Street arrogance, stood and tried to spin the whole thing as a vendetta from a man who lost control and wanted revenge. But then David spoke. "I didn't run," he said, his voice calm, even. "I disappeared because I feared for my safety. Because everything I built was taken. And because no one believed me." And in that moment, I saw the courtroom believe him. The battle, of course, was far from over. That day was just the first of many. Sterling's side pulled every trick, claims that David forged evidence, planted files, even implied I helped him fabricate it all. Do you regret getting involved? David asked me one night after a brutal day in court. We were in my apartment, lights low, dinner half-eaten. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. I shook my head. I regret a lot of things. But not you. His eyes softened. You've given me more than shelter. More than help. You gave me someone to fight for. I blinked, suddenly unsteady. David. But he just brushed a strand of hair from my cheek and said, "You saved me." And not just from the cold. The following week, Sterling's empire began to crack. One of the board members flipped. The media narrative shifted. The disappeared CEO was right made headlines. Our lawyer even smiled for the first time in public. And then, just when things were finally swinging in our favor, David got served again. A civil suit. Defamation. From Sterling. Of course. He read it silently, then handed it to me. "You're kidding," I muttered. "He's suing you?" David nodded. "He's scared." This is him lashing out. Well, then let's make him really scared. He looked at me, surprised. Then laughed, genuine and warm. "Julia?" "Yeah? Promise me something." "What?" "Don't leave. Even when this gets uglier." I didn't hesitate. "I'm not going anywhere." And even as the world spun faster and darker, we held on to that promise. Because now we weren't just fighting for justice. We were fighting for each other. I once read somewhere that the most dangerous part of a storm isn't the lightning or the rain, it's the silence right before it hits. That moment where everything holds its breath. That's what it felt like right before the trial truly took off. David and I were living in a strange rhythm, somewhere between partners in a legal war and, well, something more. I'd wake up, find him at the kitchen table combing through documents like a man possessed, and brew us both coffee strong enough to fuel a jet. We didn't talk about feelings. We didn't have to. They were there, simmering beneath every shared glance, every unspoken moment. But even the strongest bonds can fray under pressure. The defamation suit hit David harder than he let on. He started sleeping less, snapping at Rebecca, pacing the apartment like a caged lion. I tried to help, tried to soothe, but I wasn't trained for this. I was just me. One night, after another long day in court, I found him outside on the fire escape, staring at the city like it was a place he used to know. "You okay?" I asked, sitting beside him on the cold metal grates. He didn't look at me. "I'm losing myself, Julia." Every day in that courtroom, every headline, every lie they throw out, I feel like I'm fading. Becoming a symbol instead of a person. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "You're still here," I whispered. "You're still you. You just don't see it right now." He finally turned to me. "And you? Why are you still here? You didn't sign up for any of this." I wanted to say something clever, but instead I told him the truth. Because I fell for you somewhere between the chili and the courtroom. And because I believe in you more than I believe in anything else right now. His face changed, softened, then cracked. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Of losing. Of letting you down. Of what happens when this is over." I leaned in, forehead touching his. "Then be scared. But don't push me away." And he didn't. Not that night. But the days after? They tested us. Rebecca uncovered a mole. Someone leaking our strategy to Sterling's lawyers. Every phone call, every email, suddenly suspect. "We have to be careful," she warned us. "This is sabotage, plain and simple." David grew colder. Distant. Like he was building walls to survive the siege. "Don't shut me out," I told him one evening as he triple-checked the locks on the apartment door. "I'm protecting you," he snapped. "I don't need protection. I need you." His eyes were tired. Haunted. "You might not get either." And just like that, we stopped sleeping in the same room. It was only 2 nights, but it felt like years. Then came the hearing that changed everything. One of the flipped board members presented a ledger, handwritten, tucked away in a storage locker, the missing puzzle piece. And, just like that, the case turned. Sterling panicked. He released a statement doubling down on his lies. Claimed David was a bitter ex-friend, mentally unstable, romantically entangled with a civilian who compromised legal boundaries. That civilian, of course, was me. My stomach dropped when I saw my name on the news. My photo. My address. My parents called. Friends texted. Old bosses resurfaced to say they'd prayed for me. And David, he shut down. "This is what I was afraid of," he muttered. "You're being dragged into my nightmare." I grabbed his face with both hands. "We chose each other, David. Don't you dare pretend this was just your fight." He looked at me like I was the last safe place on earth. And that night, finally, again, we slept tangled together, both of us too exhausted to pretend anymore. Outside, the world was still spinning. The trial wasn't over. The media wasn't done. But something between us had settled. Love doesn't always arrive with flowers and speeches. Sometimes it comes in the shape of bruised hearts and shared battles. We weren't whole. Not yet. But we were together. And that meant we still had something worth fighting for. The cafe was never meant to make us rich. It didn't have corporate investors or a fancy app or even matching mugs. But what it did have was heart. Mismatched tables filled with quiet regulars, the smell of cinnamon in the morning, and a little bell over the door that rang every time someone walked in and remembered what it felt like to belong. David handled the books, of course he did, with that CEO brain that never fully switched off. I handled the people. I learned how to steam milk, how to bake banana bread that didn't turn into bricks, and how to remember a customer's favorite drink after 2 visits. We were happy. God, I was almost scared to say it out loud. It wasn't the kind of happiness I thought I'd have at 29, with a corner office and a 401k. But it was real. It was waking up next to someone who knew your darkness and loved you anyway. It was watching the sun pour into a cafe window and knowing you built something out of nothing. But happiness, like anything real, has layers. Messy ones. David still had nightmares sometimes. Nights where he'd jerk awake, eyes wild, like he was back in that boardroom the moment his world shattered. I'd hold him through it, whispering, "You're safe. I'm here." And me? I still panicked when the mail came with anything that looked official. Like bad news could slip in under the door if I let my guard down too long. But we had each other. And that made all the difference. It was a Thursday. I remember because I was wearing my Thursday sweater, the one with the tiny tear in the sleeve I kept meaning to fix. I was restocking biscotti when David asked me to come out front. He looked nervous. Like, actual nervous. Which was weird, considering this was a man who once stared down a jury and his worst enemy and barely blinked. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, better than okay." He fidgeted with his sleeve. "Can I show you something?" He led me to the patio out back, the one we'd fixed up with string lights and a few potted plants. There, surrounded by a handful of our closest friends, was a small table covered in flowers. And on it, a ring. "What, David?" He cleared his throat. I thought about waiting, planning something bigger. But that's never been our style, is it? I shook my head, already crying. You found me when I was no one. Loved me when I had nothing. And somehow, you turned all of that into this beautiful life. Julia, will you marry me? Now, I'd imagined that moment before. In the way you do when you're a little girl, twirling a pillowcase veil in front of the mirror. But I never pictured it with dusty flower pots and coffee grounds under my nails. And I never imagined it could feel so perfect. I nodded. Yes. 100 times yes. The tiny crowd, Rebecca, our barista Manny, even grumpy Mrs. Levinson from the bookstore next door, clapped and cheered. Someone popped a bottle of cheap champagne. It tasted like heaven. We got married the next weekend. Yep, you read that right. No delay. No frills. Just a surprise ceremony in the cafe before we opened for the day, with fairy lights blinking and muffins baking in the oven. I wore a white dress I'd borrowed from a friend. David wore the same gray sweater from the trial, the one I secretly loved because it meant he was fighting for something. We danced in the alley where we met. Someone had cleaned it up by then, added a mural. It read, "Sometimes, the fall is what saves you." I whispered in his ear, "This is home." He smiled and kissed my temple. It always was. I just didn't know it until you found me. So yeah, this is a story about second chances. About how a girl who'd lost faith in job boards and a man who'd lost faith in people found each other in the unlikeliest of places. And how, together, we built something not out of ambition or profit, but out of trust, healing, laughter, and love. People say you can't start over. But they're wrong. You can. You just have to fall first.